Welcome, everyone. Okay. Many of you were here last night and had the opportunity to hear Murali give an introduction of his humble self and how he has segued into the autobiography movie that's being manifest. And so I thought, I know most of you in one way or another, at least by name in some cases, but I'm kind of a local boy. I was born in Pacific Grove in Monterey Peninsula nearby, and I ended up going to Santa Cruz during high school for a prep school for potential study of the priesthood, because I had 16 years of Catholic education, culminating down the street here at the University of Santa Clara. And I did my apprenticeship and my career in downtown San Jose, and that was before we called it Silicon Valley. So it's a little bit ago, but I feel like I'm at home here. And the book here, Once and Future Christ, something very meaningful to me because of my background in samskaras, I guess. And I remember over the years when, after Swami had written the first volume of Promise of Immortality, which is, just a deeply inspired book, he'd say in little gatherings here and there, "Yeah, I know, I got to write volume 2. And I always felt like he was looking right at me. Not that that has anything to do with volume 2, it's very different, but I guess I felt that I had something I should say and do. And so that was the genesis of this book. It could only be made manifest during the pandemic, when I won't say I had nothing to do, but a lot less to do in terms of day-to-day things. There was a time, probably like you, when we weren't even permitted to go to our offices and to the temple for at least a few months. And we were at the time living on Camino Island for other reasons, so I had the opportunity to write it. And, like so many other people say, and Swamiji would say also, I don't know if anyone else will get anything from it, but I certainly got a lot from doing it. And so I'm, of course, eager to share in that way. Murali, what would you like to say again in respect to your great self?
Such as it is. Well, I have, all of you were here yesterday, so I won't repeat what I said. But I have served at the Ananda Seattle for a little over 20 years now. And one of the pieces of inspiration for me has always been the fact that there is such similarity between the teachings, in fact, identity amongst the teachings. And there was a book that I read when I initially came on the path, and it's a bit of an underrated book, I believe, among what Swamiji has written. It's called The Hindu Way of Awakening. And it kind of, given that I grew up with all the Hindu concepts, I didn't know where to put them because most of them seemed ridiculous. I didn't see the higher octave of them. And the Hindu way explained that higher octave in a way that my own heritage made sense to me. And then later on, I read a little bit more of that particular thing in the Bhagavad Gita commentary that Swamiji wrote, recollecting Master's commentary on it. And then transitioning onto the biblical side of things, when I read the Revelations and other similar works from both Master and Swami, I began to see the universality of this core thing called Sanatana Dharma. And I was writing this to Hriman a few days ago, that I'd always felt that there needed to be a book equivalent to the Hindu way of awakening that would go out to the people similar to me, but in the Christian tradition, who had the weight and the baggage of 1,000, 2,000 years of Christian practices and symbols and so on, and that it would pick it up from its higher octave and say, this is the meaning behind the inspiration that you felt in the teachings of Christ. And even as an outsider, and I mean outsider as in my heritage is not on the Christian side, that the once and future Christ fills that niche. So to me, this combination that at the top we have the teachings of Master and the books that Swami wrote about, and below that we have the commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita that have come to us. And kind of bringing it to the masses, taking another view, building a bridge over there is, on the one hand, once and future Christ, and on the other hand, Hindu way of awakening. So for me, these things, I take a lot of inspiration from universality, and so these things have resonated with me quite a bit, and hopefully this morning what Hriman's going to share will bring that home.
When I studied the Catechism in Pacific Grove at St. Angela's Church in school, as a young boy, I was thrilled when the nun told us that the word Catholic meant universal. I just thought that's been the hallmark of my life, is universality. The fact that things turned out a little differently, we don't need to get into, but it was deeply meaningful even as a young person. I living in San Jose, actually Sunnyvale, I sold everything I had, went to Europe, bought a car, and drove to India, down one side and up the other. And during that trip there, which was life-changing, I had a little book, I think I've shown it to Murali, printed by the Gita Press in the town of Gorakhpur, Master's birthplace, of the Bhagavad Gita. And I traveled all around India reading. It's still on my altar this very day. The old harmonium I bought in Old Delhi, chanting my way up and down India, it was a life-changing event. And when I returned, like Dorothy and Toto, that's when I met Padma, Swami Kriyananda, and fairly quickly moved to Ananda village. So I wanted to ask, of you all here, just by a hand raise, how many of you have had some point in your life, long ago or currently, where you've really sincerely tried to read parts of the Bible? A pretty good number. Because, us Catholics were not permitted to read. That's sort of a standing joke, but it's not totally a joke. We didn't really study the Bible in the way that some Protestants do. So it came a little later in my life. How many of you, and given who we are here, it's a pretty dumb question to ask, but I feel I have to ask it. How many of you have not the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, not commentaries, but how many of you sat and seriously read the Bhagavad Gita? All right. Okay, very good. Well, what Murali and I decided to do for today was to give each of us a period of time. And although in the book I'm weaving Sanatana Dharma precepts into Master's teachings and interpretations of the Bible, we thought, because we've done a lot of co-teaching over the years, and we have the Murali and Hriman show that we like to put on once in a while, we thought that Murali would start with kind of reviewing those core precepts of Sanatana Dharma. And then we'd take a little break probably, and then I'd move into weaving that into Christianity. And even Master said, and this is hard to say in the right way, but in some way he felt the attunement with the Catholic expression, and without giving a lot of explanation, because as I will say later, he didn't give a lot of explanation of many things, but I think it had to do with the looking to the saints for inspiration, for life-transforming vibrations, the sacredness of the Eucharistic feast, whereby wine and bread and wine were considered transformed literally into the body of Christ. That sacredness. I just read an article the other day by some Protestant who was even decrying the progressive lack of sacredness in some of the Protestant churches. He was comparing the architecture of even original Protestantism with the beautiful churches into these box-like things that a lot of them sort of hold. So, it's for that reason, that vibrational reason, much of what, or at least some of what has been retained in Catholicism vibrates a little more clearly with Master's teachings. So, are you ready to roll? I'm going to sit at the side so I don't distract them and interrupt them and jab them and stuff like that.
So, Hinduism was never called Hinduism by people that practiced Hinduism. And to the extent that it even had a name, it's like, if you go to Italy, Italian food is just food for Italians. And so there's really no name necessary in the Indian subcontinent for what they practiced. Others needed to give it a name because that's not what they practiced. But it did have a name that represented the essence of the nature of those practices. And what it was called was Sanatana Dharma. And it has 3 words in it. It's a compound thing made of 3 words. The first word is Sana, S-A-N-A. And the word Sana means ancient, or ever-existing is probably a better way of saying it. In fact, believe it or not, the word senator comes from the same root. Most of them are ancient, seem like they've existed forever. But it was supposed to mean something uplifting. So Sana means ancient and ever-existing. And Tana means continuous. Okay, in the Yoga Sutras, it says, Pratyaya eka tanasya dhyana, meaning if the focus of the mind is continuous on something, that is called as dhyana, and meaning meditation. So the word tana is used everywhere if you know to look for it. So Sanatana means ancient and continuous. It's ancient not because it was invented a long time ago. It's ancient because by the very nature of the universe, it has always existed. Light is ancient, not that light was invented at point t equals x, but it has, so it's in that sense. And it's continuous because it's woven into the fabric of the universe. So the word Sanatana indicates that there is no need for an inventor, there is no need to claim ownership or establish a tribal identity around it. You see where I'm going with it? As Sanatana, Dharma means way of living. What is the way of living that unifies you into the ancient, ever-existing fabric of the cosmos and thereby gets you off of it? And this is really what the term is meant to mean. Yeah. So to the extent that these practices have a name, they're called Sanatana Dharma. And they, concepts such as dharma, karma, reincarnation, ever-existing, ever-new bliss, Satchidananda, all of those, they are the core aspects of Sanatana Dharma. But beyond that, there is one thing that to get why it is Sanatana, why it's ever ancient and continuous, there's one important thing to know. And I'll start with that. And it comes down to this question. There is, if we look around us, both inside and outside, there are essentially 2 things that stand out. One is all the things that I can see, feel, and touch. We'll call this creation. That is, anything that's accessible to these senses. And the other is the fact that I am able to know all the things that I see, feel, and touch. That is cognition, okay? Creation and cognition. And at the heart of cognition lies this thing that I am, I know, I feel, meaning consciousness or awareness. My ability to touch the tip of my nose and know that I'm doing it is consciousness. The question comes, between creation and consciousness, which came first? And the view that we are all taught, the scientific view, goes something like this. That in the beginning there was nothing, truly nothing, there's neither space nor time. And as a quantum fluctuation, as a play of Gaussian probabilities, there suddenly appeared a whole bunch of energy, and because it's the nature of energy to expand, it began to expand at such an extraordinary rate that it's appropriate to call it the Big Bang. And as this energy expanded, it became dilute enough to become first light, and the light became dilute enough to become matter, and the matter began to come together through the force of an inward attraction to form galaxies and stars, and the stars ignited to release the contained light that they had, and around stars formed planets, and in a distant mediocre galaxy, and in a distant spiral arm of this galaxy, and in an unremarkable star on the spiral arm of this distant unremarkable galaxy, and on a perfectly mediocre third planet around this star, was a pea soup of biological molecules centered around carbon, which became more and more complex, and at some point, approximately 12 billion years after this quantum fluctuation started, acquired the ability to replicate and therefore perpetuate itself, a molecule which we called RNA, which eventually became DNA, and there was enough information encoded within DNA that it began to develop into a special tissue called as the brain, and at some point, approximately 13,355,000,000 years ago, according to the best estimates, one brain somewhere said, I am, and then began to ask, where did I come from? And about 100,000 years later discovered that there was a Big Bang and narrated the story that I just told you. This is the view that we are taught. And inherent in this is the fact that creation was first, and consciousness, my ability to say I am, was the emergent phenomenon. So what is more archetypal, what we go back to, it is ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and it's a nihilistic view that once I die, there is eternal nothingness. Sanatana Dharma takes a different viewpoint of it, to the extent that all of these are stories. I'll tell you the creation story of Sanatana Dharma versus science, and it goes something like this. In the beginning, there was only an infinite ocean of milk. It's hard to say how big it was because space was not there. It doesn't make sense to say how long it was there because time was not there. But spontaneously, in this ocean of milk, there appeared a fig leaf. And on this fig leaf was sleeping the baby Vishnu, sucking on his toe like only babies can do. And spontaneously, from the navel of baby Vishnu, emerged a primordial lotus. And on this lotus sat an impossibly ancient being, the four-headed creator Brahma. And like all beings, his life began with an exhalation, and the exhalation of Brahma was not the cry of an infant, but the sound of Om. And from that sound of Om manifested all beings. This is the creation. And from the sound of Om came the Big Bang, and you know the rest of the story I just told you. So this takes this one step behind, and that says that the ocean of milk is the eternal, ever-existing consciousness, which had the desireless desire to create, because the nature of a consciousness without likes or dislikes or vrittis or movements, what would you call it? It says in Sanatana Dharma, it's called Satchidanandam, ever-existing, ever-new bliss. If we went past all the things that draw us out and simply focus on the fact of being aware, the rishis tell us that that awareness will take the form of unbearable, ever-existing, ever-new bliss. So one of the names given to God beyond creation in Sanatana Dharma is Satchidananda Brahma. Brahma is that which expands. It cannot help but expand. If there is space, it expands. And its nature is bliss, and its nature is to be aware. So it's called Prajnanam Brahma. Consciousness itself is God. Consciousness itself is the expansive principle. And so it is in the teachings that come from Sanatana Dharma, the techniques always say expand your consciousness. It's not so much dissolve the ego, but expand the ego. It all comes from this fact that consciousness preceded creation. Everybody with me on this? This is at the heart of Sanatana Dharma. Once we really tune into this as the central teaching, all the rest will follow. And I'll immediately tell you two implications of this particular way of thinking. I told you the implications of saying creation comes first. The implication there is what physicists call as the thermodynamic heat death due to increasing disorder and entropy. It's the cosmic form of nihilism, that there is every atom gets so distant from everything else, and there is no more energy other than chaos, and then we are done for. Whereas the Sanatana Dharma viewpoint gives you a completely different way of looking at this. First of all, it says, if everything is consciousness, then the truth that we seek cannot be cognized or reasoned upon, but it can only be felt. That it's the heart that can know God. So instead of trying to understand the truth, try to know. It says in the Bible, be still and know, not understand. So that is one immediate consequence of this. The second immediate consequence, which is even more earth-shattering, quite literally, is that the joy that we seek is already our true nature. It's just been hidden. And it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and every now and then, when it's appropriate, I'll tell you Sanskrit straight from the Gita, partly because I know it, but mainly because it has a vibrational content that goes beyond meaning. And it says this, it says, Dhume navriyate vahnir yatha darsho malena cha yatol be navrato garbho tatha tene idam avritam. It says, just like a mirror is obscured by smoke, just like a fire is obscured by smoke and a mirror is obscured by dirt, and just as the baby, meaning the consciousness, is surrounded by the womb, i.e. of creation, in a similar way, idam, this, meaning your soul, is occupied by likes and dislikes. So that which we seek is already us. Therefore, enlightenment, spiritual progress, is a process of revelation, not a process of acquisition. So these are the top-level basics. Okay, this is, at this point, I have actually told you almost everything that Sanatana Dharma needs to say. The rest is all in the details. So let me open the hood and fill in a few of the details. This is the theology. Theology is nature of God, nature of creation. What is the technology of creation, according to Sanatana Dharma? And this is how Master explains it. He says that this eternal consciousness beyond creation, mind you, had the desireless desire to enjoy itself through the multitudes, and therefore set a portion of its consciousness into vibration. Remember, on the infinite ocean of milk, a fig leaf appears. It's a metaphor for how much vaster the spirit is. There's another one from the Vedas. What does it say? Sahasrashirshah Purushah Sahasrakshas Sahasrapat Sabhumim Vishwato Vritva Tasyatishthat Dashangulam. This is from one of the oldest of the Vedas. It's called Purusha Sukta. And it says that the eternal consciousness has 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet. And through these 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet, having occupied the entire universe, having surrounded the entire universe, 10 fingers were still left over. Isn't that an interesting, talk about Zen. You can meditate on it for ages and get a lot out of it. But this is kind of an important thing to keep in mind when you look at Sanatana Dharma. And so a portion of God's consciousness vibrated. And then Swami says, I'm quoting this directly, I cannot possibly say it better. It says that the vibration became faster, producing light and energy. This is the astral universe. And a portion of that light, the astral light, vibrated even more grossly, creating an illusion of heaviness, and became the physical matter, creating an illusion of heaviness. And this is why, this is another second important precept, is that Master says it, that matter is only light, and light is only the thought of God. Or to put it another way, the universe is but a dream of God. So this is the fact that a portion of God's consciousness whose nature is to be still vibrated into existence means that it's possible to follow that vibration back into stillness. Again, be still and know has this aspect of it too. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmani iva atmanatushtaha sthita pragnasta dochyate. That the way to stillness, sthita prajna, still consciousness, is one who is content within himself. Atmani iva atmanatushtaha. Atma means himself. So the little self is content in the higher self, and that's the way back. That's the way to follow the vibratory creation, ride the vibration of creation back into stillness. So that's another fundamental aspect. That's why we go inward. Our practices are meaningful insofar as it leads us away from all technique, like we did with Hong Sa today. Even in this simplest of all techniques, we practice it and then we say, we are done. Let me go and rest in the stillness that is my nature. So everybody with me? So let's double click on this technology a little bit more. If everything is vibration, and the nature of vibration is that there is an up and a down. In other words, it's a zero-sum game. It has to balance out. So the nature of creation is that it's a zero-sum game, and therefore, the material aspects of creation always have this duality. It's called Dvaita. It has a positive, it has a negative. There is light, there is darkness, there is positive charge, there is negative charge, there is matter, there is antimatter. There is, in the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda says, the entire phenomenal world is under the inexorable sway of polarity. No law of physics, chemistry, or any other science is ever found free from the inherent opposite and contrasted principles. Think on that for a minute or for a lifetime. Okay, but that's the nature, and it reflects our observation of what happens within the consciousness as well. That even the movements of consciousness, which is how we relate with creation. It's called Purusha and Prakriti. I'm tossing in these terms just to, if those of you that have heard of it, as to give you a mental conceptual peg on which to hang this on. The consciousness and creation, the duality is as reflected in the outward involved consciousness as it is in the outward creation itself. And therefore, to the extent that we pursue the outward likes and dislikes, we get the good with the bad. that the bad has to lead to good, the good has to lead to bad, and so on and on it goes. This is duality. And I'll come back to it in about 5 minutes when I talk about karma and reincarnation. But there is a couple of more minor details to fill in about the technology of creation. And that is, a wave, if you go out to the ocean and look at the wave, it goes up and then it comes down. And the reason it does that is there is something that draws it to the center. And in case of a fluid, in case of water, this is called surface tension. It's a property of anything that can go in a wave-like way, whether it's the tension in a guitar string or the surface tension in a fluid. There is always a centering influence. The way that a vibratory creation can endure is because of the centering influence. So there is a down, there is an up, and there is a centering influence. And this is the sound, the cosmic vibration is the sound of Om. And Swami explains that the cosmic vibration is also divine calmness. It is also divine light, and it is the inner peace. And the cosmic vibration is also the love that we feel, but it is most easily cognized because it's a vibration. It is cognized as a sound. And I won't dwell too much into that because that's not the nature of this particular discussion. But it's the sound of Om, but the sound of Om, because there is a high, a low, and a centering influence, it is triune. It has three aspects to this. And there are many, many ways of looking at these triune creation. And, in our path, Master and Swami have taught us that when we chant the sound of Om, there is the high-pitched Om, and then medium Om, and Om. It's creation, the centering sustenance, and the destruction. But in the Hindu texts, it is Brahma the creator, and Vishnu the sustainer, and Shiva the destroyer, and so on. But it's most deeper. I'll really just touch on this because Hriman and I had discussed that. I won't touch on it, but I'm just right there. So I might as well touch on it. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about the gunas. It says that all of creation, it says, Sattva Rajas Tamo iti gunaha prakriti sambhavaha nibadnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. This is where it translates from universal to personal. It says that this triune nature of the universe, the centering sattva, the outward pulling rajas, and the darkening tamas, these three aspects, these are called as gunas, and they are part of Prakriti, they are part of creation. Prakriti sambhava, along with creation, they are created. Nibadnanti dehe, meaning they bind into the body that which is imperishable. That it is because of the three gunas inherent in the vibratory nature of creation that avyaya, that which is imperishable, has been made, that which is infinite has been made finite in the body. So this is kind of the transition from the cosmic to the personal. I know I'm really going through this like a firehouse, but I just want to give you a sense, just to give you a place, kind of a unified view of how these things are dealt with, because I still got karma, reincarnation, and all of that stuff. So let me get to that right now. But the 2 points I want to make, though, is I do want to point out that amidst all the things that I just told you, if you paid careful attention, there's one more thing that's missing. When God has the desireless desire to create, He created it through the vibration of Om, but He infused every atom of creation with the vibrationless reflection of His own consciousness. And this is what the Bhagavad Gita says. It says, O Arjuna, there is nothing above me or beyond me. Through all things, as through the gemstones of a necklace, runs the thread of my all-unifying consciousness, that the vibratory creation is held in place by the stillness of God that lies at the heart of all things. And in human beings, where our spines are evolved for these things to have a very fine cognition for us, we've been blessed that we feel this vibrationless reflection of the Supreme Spirit here at the point between the eyebrows, the center of Christ consciousness. Okay, so this, now, God the Spirit beyond creation, God the vibration, the engine of creation, and God the vibrationless reflection of consciousness at the heart of all creation. This is, in Sanatan Dharma, this is called Om Tat Sat. Om, the vibration, Tat, the individual reflection of Christ consciousness, and Sat, God beyond creation. So this is the cosmic. Okay, everybody with me so far? So now the individual, and pay close attention because things are going to get very personal very quickly. Let me see, where am I? Okay, Maya, delusion, Satan, evil. That was my next topic. And I have about 3 minutes for this. So let me, you remember the creation story that I just told you? There is a part 2 of it. So at the end, the end of part 1, you had the ocean of milk with baby Vishnu, with the cosmic lotus, and the ancient creator Brahma. He had a task. He was the chief operating officer of the universe. He held, and his task was to create the universe. So what did he do? He created a whole bunch of people. In fact, he created 4 people. Said, okay, Lord, I fulfilled my duty. But what did these 4 people do? They had complete knowledge of their own divinity, so they sat and meditated and immediately merged back into creation. Creation had no sustaining power. So Brahma, being omniscient, he meditated on it a little bit, and then he got a very crafty idea. So he created 6 other people. These are all actual numbers. They come in many of the Hindu texts. He created 6 other people. And then just before sending them off, he made them forget who they were. Okay? But within that forgetfulness, he gave a dim, distant memory that they have to desperately, continuously seek some kind of joy. Okay, this is the trick that he played on us. And now, these 6 people that came into creation, they said, well, I'm here. It looks like I'm limited by my body. This is who I am, and this is who you are. Hi, how are you? This is my name. What is your name? And they started doing that. And then, okay, what do we do next? Well, I don't like this seat that I'm sitting in. It's a little uncomfortable. I dislike it. But there's a cushion that I like. Let me go sit on it. So began this cycle of likes and dislikes, because the only memory they had, the only operating instructions they had was that they needed to be happy. They forgot that they needed to be joyful. And the distinction is, one is without a dual and the other is with a dual. They decided they needed to be happy. And then, because Brahma, the creator, placed them in the dual universe, they started to pursue happiness, but things that they liked, and avoiding things that they disliked. They had it for a little bit, and then duality came in, and then they got the opposite. They felt bad, so they tinkered with it. Pretty soon it was time to die, but they remembered all the aspirations that they had in seed form. So the next time they came, they had a sense that I had tried all this, now let me be an artist. And the following life, they said, let me be a scientist. And they said, let me give all of this up and go serve other people. Let me be a foodie, and then on it went. Okay, so let's examine, double-click into this a little bit, and see the consequences of an infinite soul that forgets its infinite nature. The first consequence is it has a sense of I-ness that is limited. Okay? not a I-ness that's unlimited, not the I everywhere, enjoyable beyond the imagination of expectancy, but an I-ness that says that I am this body, I am this tribe, I am this man, I am this woman, I am this, I am that. A limited I-ness that's given the name Asmita in Sanskrit. So I'm back to Sanatana Dharma now. It's Asmita. So once you have, but the original thing that we forgot who we are is called avidya, ignorance. So Sri Yukteswar says in his book Holy Science, again it's sometimes wonderful to see the Sanskrit that Sri Yukteswar wrote, he says, Tadeva jagat karanasya maya ishwarasya tasya vyashthiravidya. He says the cause of creation is this outward flowing vibration, maya. Individually expressed, it's called ignorance. Ignorance of what? Well, the ignorance, it says in the Yoga Sutras, that thinking the impermanent as permanent and the permanent as impermanent. That, oh, I'll only meditate for 20 minutes because that's an impermanent thing. The rest of the time, I'll go find good food and a good place to sit and a good music to enjoy. That kind of thing. So ignorance comes with it the sense of I-ness, and the I-ness identified with the body says, well, I like this, I like that. That is called raga, dvesha, and it's all sustained because we are identified with the body. It's called abhinivesha. If those terms sound familiar to you, they are called the 5 obstacles on the spiritual path, the kleshas. Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. This is Yoga Sutras, chapter 2, verse number 3. Sutra number 3. So because of this, because we spend the time seeking happiness in the memory of a distant joy, and because we live in duality, that these habitual actions of likes and dislikes become lodged as vortices of energy within us, which are called vrittis, and because of those vrittis, those vortices of energy, which are sustained by desire, the desire to get what I like, the desire to avoid what I dislike. Swami Kriyananda says, he gives a beautiful metaphor. He says the vortex draws you to its center. What lies at the center? The ego. So the vortex of likes and dislikes draws the energy to the ego. You see, that's the connection. And therefore, the way out has been said in Sanatana Dharma as yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga union with the infinite is, chitta means feeling. The simplest translation is feeling. Chitta, the vortices of feeling which draw the energy to the ego. Everybody with me on this one? So if you combine all of these together, you kind of find yourself in this extraordinary pickle that the infinite soul, think of ocean of milk and this and that, which is as our true destiny, our true inheritance, that the infinite soul sucked in by the vortices of feelings and likes and dislikes, the Bhagavad Gita says, and this is one of the most inspiring verses. It says, Dhyayato vishayan pumsah sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamat krodho bhijayate krodat bhavati sammohah sammohat smriti vibhramah smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. That's quite a mouthful, and it's got a strong vibrational quality to it. It says, dwelling on the objects of sense perception causes attachment. Attachment leads to desire. Unsatisfied desire leads to anger. Anger leads to infatuation. The more we don't get angry about it, we want it more, and therefore we become infatuated with it. We define ourselves as that being the life goal. So anger leads to infatuation. Infatuation casts a veil of delusion over our true nature, and the moment that happens, pranashyati means you're doomed. That's the literal. There is a higher translation for it, but in regular words, you're doomed. That's how it says. So it all comes back Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha, dwelling on the objects of sense perception. That's why the way out, the path of meditation, is going inwards. Pratyahara, tuning into inner realities rather than the outward reality. And the technique for pratyahara is pranayama. This is the gift, as it says in the autobiography of a yogi, that the gift of India is the recognition of this intimate connection between breath and the outward movements of the heart. So this is what it boils down to, that this cosmic sound of Om and delusion and avidya, asmita, ignorance, ego, and all of that, that the way out is through this technique of controlling our energy, not controlling our body, not controlling our appetites, but controlling the energy that moves the appetites, that moves the desire. It's the back door. It's called upaya. Like I was saying yesterday, upaya means it's just a little technique that it's a shortcut. So the shortcut comes to us through the form of pranayama that takes us into inner realities, that you turn your mind from there. From then, there is less and less for us to do, in one sense, but there is more for us to do in another sense, and that will form my final two topics, about 2 or 3 minutes each. And that is one on the topic of Guru and the other on the topic of yoga. And that will finish my brief tour of Sanatana Dharma. If the way back is to ride the vibration of creation, the sound of Om, fall at the feet of Divine Mother, however you want to call it, because sound of Om and Divine Mother, it's the same, however you want to call it, then why do we need a guru? And here, there's a very classic illustration. Adi Shankaracharya is having a debate with a very, very well-known scholar. His name is Mandana Mishra. And then they've had the debate for 17 days now. And this is the very, very final stage of the debate, because both are far advanced along the spiritual path, as everybody in this room is. So it's appropriate to pick up the debate from day number 17, because all the rest we know. And here's what the debate goes like. Mandana Mishra says, he asked Shankara, if God is omnipresent, why can't I see him? If I add salt to water, can you see the salt? No, sir, it's dissolved. If you drink it, can you taste the salt? Yes. God is to be tasted. It is to be experienced, not seen. Then how can I experience God? And then Shankara looks at him and says, let me tell you a story. There was a man in a forest. He was from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was saying very far away, like saying he was from the moon, that way. He was from Afghanistan, and he was in the forest, and a few robbers came and robbed him. And after taking everything, because they didn't want him to follow them, they tied his hands and tied his feet, and they put a blindfold on him. But the robber had a distinct sense that he needed to go back to Afghanistan. He knew that's where he belonged. And then so he didn't know whether it was night or day. He walked a few feet, and then he stumbled on a tree root. He stumbled on a tree, and then he went round and round. He realized that he was going in circles. He suffered and suffered. He got bruised. He got bones broken, got scratched. He kept on suffering. He didn't know what to do. He knew exactly what to do. He just didn't know how to get there, because he couldn't see here. He couldn't do anything. And then one man came along. Then he asked, sir, why are you tied and bound and blindfolded, and why are you injured? And the man said, well, it should be obvious. I was robbed. So he says, well, where are you from? He said, I'm from Afghanistan. Well, I've been there. Really, do you know exactly how to get there? I know exactly how to get there. Can you tell me? He said, yeah, you go straight, you go north for a few paces and then turn left. And, well, can't you see I'm bound, I have blindfold, I can't see. Well, let me remove your blindfold. Oh, I can see, but I don't have the energy to go because I'm tied. Will you untie me? Will you unshackle me? I says, yes, I can unshackle you. And it's been a while since I've been to Afghanistan. Can I please follow you? Of course, hold my hand, walk with me. And Shankaracharya looks at Mandana Mishra and says, my son, that's why you need a guru. It's not that you don't know where you want to go, but it's been so long and you have been bound and you've lost your energy. It's been spent in the wrong places. So I need to untie you. I need to unshackle you. I need to show you the way. And you need to hold my hand until we get there. Otherwise, you're going to fall down. I'll let you meditate on this without expanding any further, but that's the magnetism of the guru, that it's not enough to know. We need the actual actions on behalf of the guru to show us the way. And that's why on the path of yoga, these techniques are extraordinarily powerful, but they derive their strength only because the guru holds our hands and leads us along. So technique without attunement to the guru is useless. It might as well that this man who came didn't untie you, didn't remove your blindfold, he just gave you directions and left. It wouldn't work, would it? So that's why it's not just the guru as a teacher, but it's the grace of the guru. The guru holds your hands and takes you to, well, not to Afghanistan in this case, but towards God, towards the ocean of milk. And so one final thing, and with everything that I have said, we can talk about Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Raja Yoga, and all of that. I'll skip over all of that, but I'll just read for you from Autobiography of a Yogi. The yogic science is based on an empirical consideration of all forms of concentration and meditation. Yoga enables the devotee to switch off and on at will the life current from the five sense telephones of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Attaining this power of sense disconnection, the yogi finds it simple to unite his mind at will with the divine realms of world, with the divine realms or with the world of matter. Master of his body and mind, the Kriya Yogi ultimately achieves victory over the last enemy of death. And the life of the advanced Kriya Yogi is influenced not by the effects of past actions, but solely by the directions of the soul. The devotee thus avoids slow evolutionary monitors of egoistic actions, good and bad, of common life, cumbrous and snail-like to the eagle hearts. See, it all comes down to that the ability to work with the prana in the spine. But then, and I'll finish with this final thought, all of this is self-effort, and there is the effort of the guru on our part, which I told you. And Master said, self-effort is 25%, and effort of the guru on your part is 25%. The remaining 50% is the grace of God, that eventually the consciousness that is in delusion cannot lift itself off of it. It needs to be pulled up by the grace of God. So the Bhagavad Gita, near its very, very end, says the following. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyom mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Forsaking all other dharmas, surrender to me alone. I will rid you of all your sins. Do not grieve. And so you can go round and round in all this Vedanta and philosophy and klesha and karma and vipaka and reincarnation and samsara and this and that, but eventually it all boils down to opening the heart to the grace of God and of Guru, because it's not matter that is primal around us. It is the consciousness, and it's the nature of consciousness to become one. Okay.
Somebody once asked Master, why did he focus his attention on the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings of Krishna and those of the Bible? And his cryptic remark was only that it was Babaji's wish that I do so. But I think there's a lot behind the connection between this path and Jesus Christ, and not Christianity so much, but the teachings of Jesus and all that represents. The one thing he said that was, I don't know that it was controversial even as he said it, but he said it should have been controversial, was in identifying the three wise men as his own lineage, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri, and Babaji. But he didn't explain what that meant or what the implications of that were. He very strongly endorsed what has since become increasingly known, which is The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ by Nicholas Notovich, who I won't go into the story. I mention it in the book and refer to it, but that Jesus spent those 18 years that are not remarked upon in the Bible in India and Tibet. It's an interesting story, and it makes a lot of sense to people like you and I. But in any case, he did endorse it. There is a scene. There are so many wonderful stories in the New Testament, and there's a scene in which the disciples are finally sick and tired of all those parables. I don't know about you, but in my reading of the sower and the seed and this, that, and the other thing, it was all very interesting, but I too, and I think it's our consciousness in this age, we want to know why and we want to know how. And as much as I love stories, including the great stories that Murali tells, when he's done telling the story, I say, well, Murali, what's it all mean? Great story, I can feel it, I love it, but what does it mean? That's just who we are. I think in other times, in other cultures, that question wasn't necessarily asked. And so there's the story in the Bible where the disciples are clearly frustrated, even they, with hearing all these parables. And Jesus' reply is quite interesting. I mean, I'm surprised it's even found its way into the text, actually, because Jesus said, for them, I basically tell stories, but for you, I'll tell the truth. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. But, and he went on from there. It didn't get any better. He said, they hear, but hear not, meaning they don't understand. They see, but they see not. And of course, it begs the question, well, why are you doing a ministry at all if all these schmucks don't know what you're doing? Well, that's a different question. Clearly, that was his work to do. And, you know, we can talk about reincarnation and a few things, but that's not so important right now. The other thing that he did that was very revealing in respect to the question of how much he could teach was when his detractors accosted him and about the law of divorcement. Apparently, under the Judaic law of Moses, a husband could divorce his wife with a piece of paper. Not that that's all that different now, but in any case, that's what they could do. And Jesus went on to affirm the sanctity of their marriage relationship, as you know. But the key point I want to make isn't so much what he said there. He said that for the hardness of your hearts, Moses gave this precept, meaning this was as far as Moses could go. Okay. Same thing with adultery. He moved it from the outer act into the inner act of consciousness, etc., etc. So clearly, he was recognizing the fact in both of these examples that he couldn't say more than certain things. I suspect everybody here has read the autobiography, and therefore I think everybody here has read at least some of chapter 35, The Christ-like Life of Lahiri Mahashai, in which he gives, I mean, it's the kind of chapter I'd love to send to Christians everywhere, but he gives a very insightful extraction from the last words of the Old Testament and into the New Testament about reincarnation, about the reincarnation of Jesus as the Old Testament prophet Elisha, who was the disciple of Elias or Elijah. And in the Old Testament, the last words of the Old Testament was a prediction of the reincarnation of Elias, for example. And so I'm not going to explore that right now in a group like this. That's not necessarily news. But there are two important key points in the Christian teachings that Master addressed, the one far more than the other. And the most important point was, as I did in our little meditation, who do men say I am? And Murali talked at length about the I am consciousness. And that identification of who Jesus really was has trademarked Christianity down through the ages. Not in recent centuries quite so much, but the first great so-called heresy, the Arian heresy, had nothing to do with Arians, had everything to do with the Bishop Arius, and it was the question: was Jesus divine or was Jesus human? And that took many variations in the early centuries of Christianity. But that question is the question. When Jesus said, "Who do men say I am?" the answer to that question is far more than about Jesus and much more also about who we are. Master frequently quoted that sentence in the first chapter of John, and as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. Now, the phrase sons of God repeats itself throughout the Bible in the early chapters of Genesis, yes, but also in some of the letters after Jesus' resurrection. And then he also told his disciples that these things that I do, referring to his miracles, you shall also do, and greater things. You know, what's going to happen, I may get back to it afterwards, but it just sort of weaves in. The question before me, the inspiration in writing this book, sort of hidden, although not terribly hidden, was how on God's green earth are these Christians who have painted themselves into a very tight box, how are they ever going to survive Dwapara Yuga? You know, from a somewhat, not sarcastic, but anyway, from one point of view, from an institutional standpoint, the institution's going to fight for survival, right? So they're going to have to find themselves out of that box somehow. But more importantly, we see in our lifetimes millions of people. I read periodic articles from time to time of people leaving the mainline churches. When I think back to Master's life, 1920 to 1952, the mainline churches were strongly established. There really wasn't much of a revolution going on during his time. It's important for us to realize that much of what he, like Christ, like Krishna, gives to us is not just for those present at his time, but they're seeds for the future. There were so many things that even Master could not really comment on. One of those is the Garden of Eden. If you read his original articles, and then you read some of the stuff that came out later as edited and so forth, you see an ambivalence. Sometimes he referred to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve sort of as people, the way Christians somewhat do. Sometimes he referred to it as a metaphor, as most of us tend to think of it, and that kind of thing. The very famous monkey trial, is the guy's name Spokes or Soaks? Scopes, that's it, thank you, was a very famous trial just in the years after Master arrived. And, you know, the whole theory of evolution was was a hot topic, and quite honestly, it still is a hot topic. On the one hand, evolution is being questioned even by its own advocates, or at least votaries in the fields of science, but but also by many, many people. Most of us don't have a problem with the basic theory of evolution, but Master was constrained. He didn't want to get into a debate. And that leads me also to say something very crucial to our understanding of his teachings, which is he was not a scholar. And what I mean by that is he had no interest in picking apart the history of Christianity, the Aramaic versus the Greek versus this, that, and the other, the Latin, the Vulgate Bible, and all that. I've studied a lot of that stuff. I find it interesting. But what's beautiful about Master's teachings is he just lifted them out. I'm speaking mostly of Jesus and the New Testament. He just simply lifted the New Testament out, took it more or less at face value, and then sought to show underneath what we've been given the underlying resonance with Sanatana Dharma. That was his mission. I love all the scholarship. The Dead Sea Scrolls didn't even appear until, 1947 or somewhere like that. So he didn't really have the benefit of things of that nature, but I don't think he would have cared one way or the other. So, and I bet there's some recovering Christians even in a group like this. I'm not one of them. Yeah, there's one in the back of the room. They always sit in the back of the room. But I'm not one of them. I simply expanded from the one thing to the other, and I didn't have to go through what a lot of people do. And so it's important to understand the sort of basics on how he approached it. So many people come to me and say, did you read the book of Thomas, or did you read the book of Judas? And there's the book of Enoch. Yeah, I've read them all. I mean, it isn't that crucial. The book of Judas, turns the whole thing around. And we do this too as metaphysicians all the time. We take our problems and we turn them around and see the positive side. I think that's wonderful. Well, somebody back then turned Judas around and said he was the best one there, because if it wasn't for him, there would have been no crucifixion. I don't buy that personally, but in any case, after all, the guy hung himself. But that kind of what do they call that? Anyway, there's a word for it. Rewriting history, whatever you want to call it, is typical. Master did not do that, okay? He gave a very positive feeling and honor and respect. Now, why then, perhaps, did he say it was Babaji's wish that he focused principally on Christianity, or Jesus' teachings, and those of Krishna? My own personal reason for that, and I'm sticking with it, but you can take it or leave it. I don't think I ever heard Swami say this. Is very simple. Murali ended with the simple fact that the Savior, the Satguru, the Guru, is the raft of salvation. Christians, admittedly, they only get one Savior, but Sanatana Dharma, with many avatars, are the two main traditions that we know of that exist on the earth that have a strong commitment and affirmation to the role of the Guru to bring us home to God. It makes sense to me. And that's where I come back then to my original thesis or whatever statement, which is the most important aspect of Christianity that Master focuses on, that Christians will someday have to deal with, is who was Jesus Christ? Was he a Son of God or the only Son of God? And here we are in Silicon Valley, and same with us in Seattle, and many cities around the world, but especially here and some of here in America generally, which is, what do you do when your desk is next to a Muslim or a Hindu? And I mean, at some point, you're going to have to deal with it, okay? And what did I just see? I saw it last night, actually. I'm not that much into politics. Many of us who were born and raised in the 60s and so forth, and early 70s, turned our back on politics a long time ago. But did you see where a Vedic priest did the invocation at the Democratic National Convention? Because I don't watch these things, I didn't know it, but it was just very wonderful. And whether it's the wife of the other guy, Vance, or whether it's Kamala herself, something that's been happening in America during my lifetime, at least, has been, by politics, catapulted, which is the role of Indian culture and people in American culture. When I first came to this in the 70s, and I would, hear Swami talk about Master's prediction that India and America would lead the world, or whatever he'd say. I had just come back from India, okay, so it wasn't like, foreign to me at all. But I looked around at these Americans and I said, these guys don't have a clue. How can that ever be? But look what has happened in this country in these whatever years I've lived, culture, fashion, cuisine, politics, technology, religion, every facet of human endeavor. People are looking more and more with admiration, respect, and for inspiration and guidance from India. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. So a lot of things that Master said then are, okay, for us, we were drawn to it. But when I look around and I read statistics about people who follow that other fellow whose name I can never quite remember, who might be running for the presidency right now again, 47, I mean, when I think of all the people who are really practicing the old-time Christian religion, when I do that, I just sort of despair. But I think back to maybe the 70s, maybe I can't remember the dates. One time I called my parents. They used to live in Monterey. They're gone now. And I was at Ananda village, and my mom was telling me, yeah, and we're recycling. What? You're recycling? My parents? Well, it's like the 100th monkey. And look at the pace of change. As entrenched as some of us might feel the culture is in old ways, I think, at least some of you, I may not live to see it, but I think some of you will see some shocking changes to come. So a lot of what Master gave us is yes, for us, but how many of us, how many disciples of Paramhansa Yogananda are there, percentage-wise? It's as much for the future. Now, the other fulcrum point is far less important, and it's called reincarnation. You can be a good whatever, Jew, Muslim, Hindu. You don't have to believe in reincarnation, because the path of faith is its own reward, all right? It's not all that important. On the other hand, where it segues into the evolution of Christianity, and I checked it again last night, approximately 33% of the people in this country alone believe in reincarnation. It varies by the different, the evangelicals less so and the Catholics more so, etc. But overall, it's a growing recognition. How many of you watched the not very well done movie, or read the book Soul Survivor? Anybody here? What's the matter with you people? It's because you didn't need to read it, and I get that. But it was the little boy who was having nightmares, and basically the story was he had been shot down in in the Sea of Japan from a fighter plane, and it's a very interesting story, but the only reason I bring it up is it took place in America, okay, with parents who were more or less Christian. In any case, they probably never even heard of reincarnation and certainly didn't believe in it. And then they made a movie of it. And so, of course, there are maybe hundreds of books with authenticated stories of people who do remember past lives. But here's the fulcrum point. Step back for a minute. I've only got one life to lead. That's it. Never mind how I got here, or why I'm a schmuck, or why I'm a genius. Never mind all those other ancillary questions. Here I am. And I've got one life to lead. And I happen to believe that I will survive the death of this body. But I only get one. That has to mean that whatever happens afterwards is forever. There's nothing wrong with what they came up with hell and heaven. It's a necessary byproduct of the simple fact that that's what it appears to be. The resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, and the Christians who believe that their bodies are going to come out of the graves, I don't want to quote them because they all have different beliefs, but basically that idea that I get to continue on in some form of a body or another is very simple. In that time, in that period of Kali Yuga, people didn't talk about my ego as if it was separate from my body. My body was me, is the I am. There is nothing else. So if my body dies, that's it. And the other thing is this. When you read, Swami has a wonderful chapter in his autobiography, The New Path, called Reincarnation. And again, in a group like this where you've all read it, he gives all sorts of quotations from the Jewish tradition and so on and so forth about reincarnation down through the ages, and how the precept, if you will, was officially removed from Christian dogma in, was it the 4th century, 5th century, something like that, I don't recall offhand, and all of that. But I thank Swamiji for the simple fact that rather than regretting that kind of thing, I sort of get it now. Because like a friend of mine who used to be part of Ananda and used to give classes and so on, he gave a talk somewhere and he overheard someone after the talk saying, "Oh boy, we get to come back." It's like, hello. Patanjali says one of the obstacles to the spiritual path is missing the point. Well, that person missed the point. In other words, if Jesus had, and this was from Swami, Master, I don't think ever said this. Swami explained that if Jesus had used the opportunity, and he had a number of opportunities, to insert reincarnation as a dogma, that would have taken his ministry down completely. Why? The Jews would talk about it. Some of the different sects, the Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife. The Pharisees did. It was such an unsettled concept. And Judaism generally, I've been told, is not so much dogma or driven as much as obedience driven, behavior, and so on. And so it was not a recognized or acknowledged or accepted precept, as it was, of course, in India, long before that, at the same time, at that time. He had several instances. I'm just going to recall some of them to you, but I know you all know them. One of the ones that are dear to my heart was on the Mount Tabor, the Mount of Transfiguration. I remember as a boy just reading that, and I didn't have words in my head like astral, or they didn't teach us those things. But when I tried to envision the transformation of Jesus and then Elias and Moses, there was something in me that just went, wow. I sort of got what it was on an energetic, and you call it a visual level, if you will. So they're coming down from this incredible experience. What was it? James, Peter, and John, I think it was, were the three disciples who Jesus took up there. And so they're coming down. And the apostles the three guys were blown away. They were scared, okay, if you read the text of it. It just sort of blew their socks off, though I don't think they wore socks at those days. In any case, so they're coming down. And I can imagine if it was me, I'd pester the guy with a lot of questions like, hey, can you explain this? But no. You know what they said? And they don't say which of the three actually vocalized this, but one of them said, okay, where's Elias? Why did he say that? Because the last words of the Old Testament were a prediction that Elias would come to herald the coming of the Messiah. Every good Jewish boy knew that. And so that was the first. They didn't question whether he was the Messiah. I think they got that more or less intuitively in the experience. I don't know. The first thing they must have given, the first thing somebody asked was, hey, that's cool, but where's Elias? So they knew immediately what was going on. What did Jesus say? Well, it's in parentheses. And then they understood that John the Baptist was Elias. Now, Jesus could have expounded. The boys there, the three guys, they didn't need to talk about reincarnation. They already knew that Elias was coming back. Now, that scene was repeated, whether it was, transmuted into a different context in one of the other Gospels, I'm not really sure, but those words repeat themselves elsewhere. Not so much important. The one that I also love is an entire chapter 9 in John. It's the story of the healing of the blind man. Do you remember that? Jesus is, trucking along, probably near the temple, as I recall the context. Anyway, there's this guy, and he's sitting out there. He's there every day. I guess everybody knew him. He's blind, okay? And so he's doing this. And anybody see that scene in The Chosen? Yeah, okay. I have some issues with The Chosen, but that's personal to me. I'm still a Jesus of Nazareth fan, but never mind. They had some beautiful scenes like Nicodemus when he just couldn't get himself to, that was so touching. There were some beautiful things there, but there's a lot of things I don't care for. In any case, so they come by and the guy's there, and forget what triggered the conversation exactly. One of his detractors, those doggone Pharisees, poor Pharisees, asked him, Master, they said, why is this man blind from birth? Was it, I'm paraphrasing here, was it him or was it his parents? And Jesus had the perfect opportunity. First off, the fact that anybody would say that someone blind from birth would be the cause of it is already talking about reincarnation, already talking about karma. Did anybody even question that? No. Now, Jesus' response was a cop-out in my book. Swami and I had a big argument over what Swami wrote about that chapter. And I'm sticking with my story, and you're not going to get to hear it. But basically, Jesus sidestepped the issue entirely. He did not answer the question. It has some profound implications for your topic tomorrow, how to face tests and trials, but it's too deep a subject and too complex one to bring up here. But it's a beautiful story, and it occupies, though a short chapter, it nonetheless occupies an entire chapter in John. And so Jesus sidestepped the opportunity to address reincarnation. And I'm convinced, more than logically is all I can say, that he could not have done so. That had he done so, it would have torpedoed his impact and his mission. It just was not something the Mediterranean cultures were prepared to hear and deal with. okay? It was, as most of you have studied the Yuga cycle that Sri Yukteswar gives us, it was within a few hundred years of the nadir, the lowest point in human consciousness that is taught. And, Jesus was crucified, but I don't know how much you know about these things, but those dadgum Romans, they crucified thousands of people. And in 46 or 7 years after his death, when they destroyed Jerusalem, not just Jerusalem, but they had a campaign to destroy Palestine, and that's started the diaspora for the Jews. They crucified thousands of people all along the roads. I'm not denigrating the what Jesus went through, don't get me wrong, but it was a brutal time. The closest thing to watching gladiators and burning Christians at the stake in the Colosseum and having a good time was the running of bulls in Spain, and that's not all that popular, I understand, anymore. In other words, consciousness has really changed, okay? And so the identification of the I am with the human body was never even questioned. Okay? And so in the centuries preceding Jesus' appearance, when you study the Old Testament, the language that they used when they did address questions of you remember the Old Testament story, I can't remember the guy's name offhand, where he does go to heaven, Zachary or something anyway, and his servant who he tortured, he goes to heaven and the rich man goes to hell. So there were stories, references in the Old Testament to heaven and hell, but it's sort of spotty. And it's very much in the way that Christians inherited the narrative. I go to heaven, I'm sitting there in my body, I'm saying holy, 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 or I'm strumming harps, or anyway, it's just me. Okay? So that's their legacy. The other thing that is undeniable, I feel sorry for did you know that in the 14th century, some pope made the Jews of his time or his city, maybe it was just the Vatican, wear yellow stars? It's a pretty sad history. But when you think about it from their standpoint, Moses took them out of captivity. Forget, what's his name? Was it Darius? No, it was Nebuchadnezzar let the Jews come home from Babylon where they had been taken into captivity. Their whole history their spiritual life was intertwined with political freedom, if you will. Okay? Look at Krishna and the Mahabharata. Talk about a battle for political freedom, if you want to look at it that way. And so, of course, they expected their Messiah to free them like Moses. You can't blame them and there was no preparation for the thought that any human being would be the Son of God. That's blasphemy, okay? It was a drama that had to be enacted. And trying to distance ourselves and trying not to rewrite, I can't think of that verb we use a lot, but not trying to rewrite Christian history and wag our little thumbs at all the bad things they did. They did plenty of bad things. But on the basis of our particular values is very important for us in coming to grips with who Jesus was, depending on how much baggage you might carry. Okay. I'm never one to watch a clock. Watch a clock? Yeah. Now, did Jesus die for our sins? Well, he might have died for yours. I don't know. But the way Swami put it, it's a very pious sentiment. Okay? There's no lack of sinning then and ever since, right? And so what does it mean that Jesus died for our sins? Well, to as many as received him, to them gave he the power. But one of the trick phrases in that we usually don't quote, and this is our problem, follows that. He says, and even those who believed on his name. So we've got a problem. We have a problem, okay? Because we usually interpret that, to as many as received him, and we talk about attunement, which we should, and so on and so forth. I imagine, here's my story, here's my narrative. These 11 guys, 11 apostles or whatever they were called, they were sent out, they had a moment of beautiful celebration when Jesus came back to them. I mean, they must have been over the top. But then he disappears, and it's like, what are you going to do? No, what are you going to do? And, Thomas, he went to India, right? I mean, I remember the time Swami sent a few of us out to Sacramento with the EFL Education for Life book to a shopping center, and we were supposed to hand out pamphlets to housewives coming out of the grocery store. And the thing was, why is Johnny angry? Okay, I've never been much of a proselytizer, and I bet there's nobody here who is either. But when I think of what those guys went through, I admire that, That was their mission. That's what they had to do. And so if maybe, in order to sell the merchandise of their gospel, which was pretty tough, I mean, the guy was convicted by the Romans, crucified, and you said he raised from the dead? And I'm some guy in Corinth or Rome? That's a tough sell, guys. So if just maybe they added the phrase, and even them that believe on his name, I'm okay with that. Because our understanding, our own teachings, what does the word name refer to? Right, Murali? He talked about it. The name of God isn't Jehovah or whatever, or Allah. It's the own vibration. Patanjali says that right up front in the Yoga Sutras. And so even from our standpoint, even those who believe on his name are those who attune themselves to the vibration of the Christ within and without. Swami tells a cute little story, doesn't he? I don't know the context, whether he was in Mount Washington or the Hermitage in Encinitas exactly, but they were somewhere. And so he's in a room, and as he often said he would close his eyes and Master be talking to some people, right? And so he's doing that, and he's having this, kind of upliftment with Master's spirit. And then Master stops, and he walks over to young Walter, hands him an apple, just hands him an apple. And didn't say anything. You got to understand that they don't say that much, really. Swami understood that he was saying, yes, in the overarching spirit, but yet here I am. And this is one of the great paradoxes. Krishna answered the paradox when Arjuna asked him, should I approach God as personal or impersonal? Well, as I said originally, my own inclination leans the other way, but here I am. I'm very personal. And you can insult me very easily. And so we can't get rid of the paradox that the I am is both personal and impersonal. In fact, we can't get to the impersonal except through the personal. To work out our karma means to, unlike some of the Christian dogmas that taught that the world is evil. That's another theme I have in my book. I don't know, but is the world evil or is the world something else? We have St. Francis to thank for initiating a little bit of a nudge in the direction that we all have gone. But it's a paradox. It's a conundrum. The need for the guru, if there was no avatar, if there was no human being who incarnates into human form and what did we say in the Catholic Mass, and something dwelt amongst us, and you would genuflect. Remember that Gary? Anyway, I grew up in the Latin Mass, and I spent 4 years of Latin. I'm still trying to get over it, but I know Caesar divided Gaul into 4 parts, and there's a few things I picked up here and there, but still, if there was no avatar through history, how could we possibly aver Tatvamasi? How could we possibly say, I am that I am, as God said to Moses in the Old Testament? We couldn't. We need to have that demonstrated to us so that we can aspire to it. Now, it's much trickier than that. The transmission of consciousness, which is what Murali referred to, is of course a core tenet of Sanatana Dharma. And it's a core tenet of Christianity. I am the way, the life, and the truth, and no one reaches the Father but through me. But that personal pronoun, I, is the issue. And it's my issue. Who am I? Who is it that was in the mirror this morning before I had my coffee? It wasn't a pretty sight, I assure you. And so that is the core issue that we face, and the beauty and the power of Vedanta, of Sanatana Dharma, is to resurrect an understanding of the I am. And that is the one thing that has the most potent power to resurrect Christianity from the tomb of its ignorance. Because I believe it's the most populated religion on the face of the planet from what I've read in terms of adherence, although it's going down rapidly. But still, I think of Murali here, for example, and all of our friends, both here in this country and in India. I see people of intelligence and education and travel who have been brought up in different ways, and some positive, some not so positive, some well educated, some, not so well in Hinduism. And what do they do with all that baggage, And it's the same 50-50, didn't Master say? Ignorance is 50-50, East and West. I love that recording of his own voice. You call them, not pagans, heretics or something, but you don't know what they call you. Didn't Gandhi come to Britain for that conference in the 30s, and didn't he carry with him all these pots of Ganga water or something? Because it was blasphemy for an Orthodox Hindu to even leave the country, what to mention go to a pagan land like Britain. So these things that require resolution, and the other key point is, of course, issue of sin. It took me years. I'm not that bright, but it took me years to realize that we metaphysical types, we self-realizationists, we think we're above sin, but we use the word karma. And so if somebody gets sick, part of what I see goes on with people is they think, what they do wrong. It's like the Book of Job is one of my favorite books. Okay, and you know what happens in the Book of Job? Ever read it? Okay, Satan shows up in the heavenly court and says, that guy Job, he's righteous, but if you took his wealth and his health and his family and so on away, you'd see he wouldn't be quite so righteous. So that he gambled. But that's a very deep teaching. Again, you save that for tomorrow. In any case, I don't know why I brought up the Book of Job exactly, but sin and karma. But we do it too. We see ourselves or somebody else who's suffering mentally, physically, and we kind of automatically begin thinking, you know why? He used to eat meat, or I don't know, doesn't exercise. Well, that may all be true, but the devotee looks at these trials in a different way, but you'll have to come tomorrow to hear that. So we are not that much better. We just call it karma, all right, instead of sin. Now, for us, we understand that karma is neither good nor bad, so that's definitely a leg up on the concept, certainly. But, Master, I can't quite citate where this comes from, whether a transcription of one of his talks. I don't think I hear his voice on those CDs. But he wags his finger at Divine Mother and he says, "You're free from karma and you created all this." And but basically, for the one thing that keeps us tied to the karma, it's the ego. We have this, the I am understanding has moved from the physical body, at least to the astral body. And the shortcut to cutting karma is to cut the thread of ego to which it's bound. If, and you can save this for tomorrow, if we live protected by Om, if we live in the vibration and presence of God and Guru, then whatever karma does come to us, we're not bound by. Because yogas chitta vritti nirod. We are developing our ability not to react to what we might perceive in the moment as bad karma. We're even-minded, maybe even, sometimes, cheerful, eventually even grateful for that which is ours. And the devotee sees that which come, that is ours, as the loving hand of God, maybe somewhat disguised, admittedly. And so these principles of sin, and I want to segue into the whole issue of Jesus' redemption on the cross, that's a much harder issue because of its having been embedded so deeply into Christianity. I'll let them work that out. I don't have a solution for them on that one. But it does align with Sanatana Dharma and the teachings, as we know, inasmuch as a true guru, even many saints, in fact, can indeed, it's taught, take on the karma of individual disciples. The way Swami would put it is that a saint, and I've been studying the life of Padre Pio recently in my seclusion as just one example, a saint can take on the karma of this person or that person and so forth, but the avatar has the kind of power that reaches through the centuries. I think of all the disciples of Krishna and Buddha and Jesus Christ. St. Francis lived 1,000 or so years after Jesus. He was the first to have the wounds, the stigmata. Okay, he walked with Christ there in Assisi. And so the avatar and the overarching spirit, combined with the attunement of the devotee, can indeed have the grace to lift karma. Indicative of that are two stories from the New Testament that are very dear to me. The one, which was recently, I think, in one of our readings, about the woman who touched the robe of Jesus. Wasn't that in a recent Sunday service? That has always touched me because, I don't know, I'm not that visual, but when I read the Bible, I just sort of visualize what's going on and so on. And so there they are, I don't know, probably in the marketplace somewhere, in Capernaum or somewhere, and all these people are, by that point, his reputation or whatever, the two-legged newspaper was such that thousands were coming to hear Jesus, okay? And people were pawing at him and so on, and because he had done so many miracles. And so, well, you know the story. They're walking along, or maybe barely walking along, being pressed in on all sides by a crowd, the Bible says. And then he stops and he says, "Power hath gone out of me. And who has touched me?" And Peter, who I think of the movie Jesus of Nazareth, who is a bit of a stocky kind of guy, says, basically he reprimands you. He says, "Oh, come on now. All these people are touching you. Why? What are you trying to say?" And he didn't have the common sense to keep his mouth shut sometimes. But it was the woman with the hemorrhage, it says, I don't even know what a hemorrhage is, but who touched him and was instantly healed. And she was scared to death. I mean, right? It says, and she finally came out of the crowd and admitted who it was. And Jesus said, as he said to others whom he healed, your faith has healed you. Now, in her case, he didn't say go and sin no more, because that apparently wasn't necessary. But there we see in that story demonstrated the relationship between the release of karma from the guru, depending on the faith of the person. Because many, we think of all those miracles, in speaking as we are, of course, of the life of Jesus. But there were thousands of people he didn't heal. Nobody ever talks about that. There were just some. The other story is the one where, I just love this one. He's giving a satsang, right? He's in this house, and they did this well in The Chosen. I like this scene too, somewhat. And he's in the house giving a satsang, and all these people are, it's just like what you'd see in India, it's I just love the scene. And people are poking in through the windows, and in my travels in the Far East, it's sort of, that's a scene. You see it. You're used to anyway. And so this guy comes on a stretcher. Remember that story? And they climb up on the roof, and it's a thatched roof, and they they chop away at the roof. They destroy this poor guy's house, and they drop the guy on the litter down in front of Jesus to be healed. And so these daggum Pharisees, these rascals, they're also there, right? And they're there to collect information. Anyway, you know what they're doing. And so Jesus, he has to stop his thing and his talk and so on. He had no choice. And this guy is there. And he says, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees are saying, hey, wait a minute, only God has the power to forgive sins. And so he turns to them, because they're thinking that. They don't say it. He hears their thought. And he said to them, what's easier, to say your sins are forgiven or get up and walk? And so to show you that the Son of Man has the power to forgive sins, he turns to the guy and says, get up and walk. And the guy got up and so forth. So again, we see that nexus between faith and healing. And so this whole concept that Jesus came, believe in the blood, and by grace, not by works are you. That's one of the great distortions introduced by Protestantism, I'm sorry to say, that has really distorted Christianity, because all throughout the New Testament are obvious teachings about the need to do your work, if you will, heal the sick, take care of people and all of that. So that's going to be a harder one, except that, it's like heaven and like eternal heaven and hell. It just doesn't really resonate with people. So, being a Catholic, I would go to the confessional, and like a lot of little boys and girls of my age, we had to ask ourselves, gee, did I do any sins? And sometimes we would make up a few just to have something to talk about. I punched my brother, or, my mom said to count to 10 before I punched him, but I only got to 5 and then I punched him. But, Swami has pointed out, and the life of Padre Pio is just one example. The other one are my friend who came from here, Jamuna, Nayaswami Jamuna. She does stories of saints every summer, and she did Jean Vianney, beautiful story of a saint in the time of the French Revolution. Is that what we call it? Anyway, the time that the church underwent a tremendous amount of persecution and so forth. So Jean Vianney did the same thing. Eventually in his life, people came from all over France and beyond to take confession. Padre Pio too, thousands of people. U.S. Soldiers during World War II, both Protestants and Catholics, heard about him if they were stationed in southern Italy and came and heard confession. And again, he didn't heal everybody, But when the Spirit moved him, the stories are just incredible. But here's the point. Just because the church says, based on what Christ said to Peter, when Peter recognized him as the Christ, that what you bind in heaven and earth, so on and so forth, I won't bother to quote it. So you go to a priest and you bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 6 months since my last confession, and here are my sins. Did I get it right? Anyway, it's been a long time. I probably should go back. And then you tell them your sins, and sometimes they talk to you, but mostly they don't. They say, okay, three Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers, and so forth. And I mean, that's all beautiful. I don't knock it, but to what Swami would say is to be healed, to be forgiven of your sins, if you put the word karma in there, is to be forgiven or healed of not just doing it again, and how many people just do it again, but also the consequences. If you overate or you did other things, addictive behaviors, confessing that and being absolved isn't necessarily going to cure the consequences of your action. Okay? And so it has its place in human psychology, I suppose, and certain grace involved with being willing to go in and say those things in front of somebody else. I don't knock that as such. But the patina of sanctity and the patina of power that's been placed upon that particular sacrament is subject to question. Now, where I really want to go is to the most important of all, which is, of course, the Eucharist. It's such a beautiful scene at the Last Supper. I've reread it many, many times. Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, and he says, "You are my friends." And it's such a beautiful scene because in our lineage, Babaji's over the top, so let's just put him over there. But when you read the life of Lahiri and Sri Yukteswar and Master, you see that element of friendship. That is really the essence of the spiritual path. If I have to come back 1,000,000 times, I will come back. And so in the beauty of the Last Supper, Jesus says, the words, do this in remembrance of me. This is my body, and he breaks the bread, and he passes out pieces. This is my blood, and he takes a sip of wine, I guess. They have done something beautiful with that. Padre Pio would go into ecstasy. He'd hold the host up, right? And John Vianney too, and others. So, but let's look at that. Is it the host in the Mass, or is it the supplicant? How many thousands of Masses, how many hundreds of Masses? I used to be an altar boy, you probably guessed that by now. And, how many of those priests I went to, 20 minutes, we're done, right? And I've seen the priests, the Hindu priests, same thing, they're doing, it's not that magnetic. And so it's really an inner thing. Master gave a very beautiful, and for those of us who practice Kriya, this is one of the ways that I practice Kriya. But you can do it with Hong Sha and any pranayam, really. But Master said that the wine symbolizes prana, life force. Sri Yukteswar teaches us to sing, let pranayam be your religion. Prana is Divine Mother. And so the vitality of the wine, the symbol of which is, I think, one reason Master translated the Rubaiyat, because the symbol of wine is used throughout the Sufi tradition. The bliss is associated with the intoxication of the wine. And so too, what's that? A jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou under the bough, right? In the Rubaiyat, it's a beautiful scene. And so when we focus on prana, and I'm thinking especially in Kriya, that prana is the living presence of Divine Mother. Do we ever think of that? And when we ascend back to spirit, the Catholics, the nuns taught us to pray to the Virgin Mary to intercede in my prayers to Jesus. Master said that is a very deep teaching. They don't really understand it. It's because it's through the Divine Mother that we ascend. It's through prana, which is the life force of the astral world, that we eventually ascend to the causal world wherein dwells the Christ or Krishna consciousness. And so it is, the gift of pranayam, and especially kriya, is to rotate the prana through the subsidiary channels to magnetize the central channel until we transcend the breath and enter the causal field of the spirit. The host, to me, is the spiritual eye. And when the priest would lift the host, that's what I see. And that prana is the wine of life, the gift of life, the Divine Mother, who, if I focus my devotion and so forth on her, will eventually disappear. One of the first things I did when I meditated here in Santa Clara, in my garage, during when I was in college, we didn't know anything back then. There were hardly any books. I suppose East-West existed, but I hadn't heard of it. And so, I did that thing where you light the candle and you stare at the candle, right? Or a white wall. I actually had a white wall. And what happens, even sensory, or like smell, anything, taste, all five of them, you have to keep moving. If you stare at a candle long enough, it vanishes. And the same thing with prana. If you immerse yourself in prana, become fully identified with prana, it's sort of like, I imagine the prana saying, oh yeah, me? Yeah, sure, okay. If you finally paid some attention here to me. And then, then I'll let you through the gate. The gateless gate through the spiritual eye. And then it yields. Divine Mother then yields and sort of opens her whatever and shows you the heart, okay? The Spirit, the Christ within us. And so these symbols, his interpretation of these very sacred rituals, and of course with yaga, you've got the ghee and the rice. It's a little bit different. The ghee is more akin to the prana, of course. The rice being more of our past karma, uncooked, meaning it hasn't fructified, it hasn't blossomed yet, hasn't been cooked as such, offering it into the fire of prana. Okay, the ghee representing our karma, our own likes and dislikes, you might say, and the rice representing our past. The ghee being our current vrittis, and the other being our past, being offered unitively into the fire of true prana, into the light. Anyway, these Master has given us, and like you said, in the Hindu way, and in the teachings of the Second Coming, a deeper understanding of these rites and rituals. Now, crucifixion, again, I don't want to intrude on tomorrow's talk, but, it's how many of us grew up with these crucifixes everywhere, some of them pretty hideous. That's maybe not nice for me to chuckle, but I have great reverence for that. But it's so deeply misunderstood. Of course, the giving of the body, the crucifixion of the body, the sacrifice of the body, which, as I've already said, was meaningful to the people of that time, identified as they are. I mean, as we are too, let's face it, but more so then. But what does it really teach us? What did Master really say in Swamiji? He said that it gives us the example for how to face our tests. Thy will, not my will. But what did he do in the Garden of Gethsemane? He was no dummy. He said, hey, if you want to let this one go, it's okay by me, right? Let this cup pass. And then immediately he said, thy will, not will. So he showed us in a very human way. We don't, I'd love to, Swami at the end of his life would sort of joke that I eat persecution for breakfast. Well, okay, good for him. I don't. Most of us aren't quite there yet. When I say persecution, I mean any number of things. It can be physical illness, mental struggles, and so forth. To get to the place where we welcome in the moment our trials is a very high. It's sort of like karma yoga, nishkam karma. First I want to be an instrument, right? But the ultimate is that you're not an instrument at all. God is the doer. And you go through various stages of purification whereby, as Swami said, I don't know where Master begins and Swami ends. But you have to work your way through that. Same thing with the crosses that we bear. Swami made it really clear. Most of you have read Sadhu Beware, right? Great book. If you're a disciple of Master, you should make that a kind of a Bible. Because to these close disciples, Master was as, sounded very Christian. Swami gave to me Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, because Master said that's not the imitation of Christ, that is Christ. But I guarantee you, most of you probably aren't ready to read that book. It's very Christian. It's very, I don't recommend it to anybody unless you've got deep Catholic samskars. But the point is this, ego transcendence is a part of the path. It's just that in this new dispensation, which I do need to talk about, so I hope I don't forget, in this new dispensation, what do we say every Sunday? Where is in the past the coin of man's redemption was suffering and sorrow. For us now, the payment has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. Swami added calm acceptance to the text a couple of years after he first wrote it. And so, yes, there is a new dispensation, which I want to talk about. But me Blessed Mother from Ireland, she would say, offer it up, Terry, offer it up to the Lord. And, there's a place for that. I'm working on an article inspired by Padre Pio because it's a concept that we don't see much in our teachings. But it's the concept of taking on karma. Swami once said you could do kriyas for somebody. Somebody who's just had a surgery who can't do their kriyas, you could do kriyas for them. We don't really talk much about like in Lent we would forego something or other. I don't remember what it was, meat or something on Fridays. It's pretty cheesy. But to actually make sacrifices privately for the benefit of, yes, yourself, but I'm thinking of other people who are in need. We don't really talk about that. That's a valid teaching in all faith traditions, okay? It's just something we don't happen to talk much about. But this new dispensation is truly, nothing's new, but here's what I want to talk about. Jesus was excoriated by the Pharisees for the fact that they plucked ears of corn on the Sabbath and I don't know what else they did on the Sabbath, but he got raked over the proverbial coals by the Pharisees for violating their sacred law of the Sabbath. Well, what was the biggest controversy after Jesus' resurrection in the Acts of the Apostles? The single controversy was what? Circumcision. As they went out to the Gentiles. Can you imagine St. Paul and Peter going out to the Romans and saying, you got to be circumcised? Not going to go there. In other words, they had to face whether or not the covenant of Moses was going to be incorporated into the new dispensation. They right away, Paul especially, came up with the intuitive understanding, the inspiration that this was something new. They even had the gall to change the Sabbath to Sunday. To not be circumcised and not to obey the Sabbath was at the pain of death. They weren't kidding around. And so my question to Christians is, if Jesus and his little band of men could throw the Mosaic law out with the trash, maybe it's time for some new ideas. Maybe it's time to change some pretty deeply embedded concepts, okay? So this new dispensation is a very real thing, and it's going to take time. When Master said self-realization would be the religion of the future, you all know this. I won't go totally into it, but Swami would say he could not have meant some organization with perhaps that name would be the overarching Catholic Church for the planet Earth. Besides self-realization, even the concept implies something very individual, doesn't it? Something very personal. It doesn't really smack of the vibration of organization as such. That's part of the new dispensation. We go within. The kingdom of heaven is within you. And so, over time, more and more, it's these ideas like reincarnation. They're right there for eyes to see. You see, I'll just touch a little bit about. Oh my goodness, I better wrap things up. I want to touch a little bit about the future, and I'm going to end there because I want to stop talking. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but Christianity has 1,001 different divisions or sects, as they say. There's no pope. There's probably not even going to be some great saint, because they'll just label them the Antichrist, who's going to come along and reform Christianity. We're in an age of egalitarianism. We're in an age of self-realization. Whatever transformation Christianity and other faiths, but here we're talking of Christianity, will take place is not going to be from the top down. That's not what inspires people in Dwapara Yuga. It's going to be from the bottom up. It's going to be people leaving their faith traditions. It's going to be people taking up meditation and yoga. It's going to be people, even scholars, rereading things and say, hey, do you realize, as we have talked about even just a little bit today, there's going to be a wellspring of realization. This is me speaking, okay? So don't go too far with this. But I believe the wellspring of realization is going to come from the grassroots this time, in this new dispensation. And it's partly the reason why Yogananda was not interested in Yoganandaism. You know, Jesus and Krishna could say, I, this. Yogananda was very circumspect about the personal pronoun. Okay? Even in India today, part of our mission there, and Swami's mission, was to remind people in India about this fellow called Paramhansa Yogananda. And that movie that we talked about last night is very much in that way. But I believe, and Swami more or less said as much, so I have a little bit more oomph behind it, are not founding a new religion called Yoganandaism. Now, we are disciples of yoga. I get that. But when you look at Yogananda's life and Swami's life, and even Jesus' life with those parables of his, every avatar with a public mission has a dual life: to train disciples and then to bring a new dispensation into general mass consciousness. Dwapara Yuga, and all the books that Swami wrote, cooperative leadership or supportive leadership, and all these different things, communities spreading like wildfire. I hope and pray that, and I love what Asha is doing. I hope and pray that the work of Ananda will always strive to maintain a balance of the universality of Master's teachings, while at the same time the hive of self-realization, places where disciples can gather and deepen their attunement to the Guru. If we go too far one way or the other, we will lose the spirit of Dwapara Yuga. We will lose the spirit of Master's mission. And so, there's a lot of, it says in the Revelations, for the healing of the nations, I have come. And Master has come for the healing of the nations. they were referring to the chakras, the nations of our inner nation at that particular, in that particular context of our teachings, granted. But it's a both and. That's the mantra of my life. There's an inner reality, and revelations can have an outer reality. I talk about that a little bit in the book. And they can both coexist. And that's what we have to understand. Just as we are both personal, we have an ego and we have our stuff, and at the same time is Tattvamasi, I am that I am as well. It's a great teaching, and I hope and pray, true to Master and true to Swamiji, that this work will always try to find a balance. It may ebb and flow. Since the introduction of the Festival of Light and since Swami's passing, we've had to really nurture the hive. I get that. But I hope and pray there'll always be an Asha and other people who go out with the universal message of self-realization, because we need that. That's why Padma and I were sent to Seattle long ago. That's why, Asha was sent here, and David were sent here, and others sent to Italy, and others to India, because we need to strike that balance. And I was so inspired. I would go with Swami to all sorts of things. Given who I was, I'd have to take him to cocktail parties with the bankers, right? That sort of was my shtick back then. And to watch him talk to anybody, Master was to say, you and I should be able to talk to anybody meaningfully, but also appropriately, okay? Not to throw pearls before swine, which was a recent talk I think somebody gave. We should be able to speak the language of pretty much anybody. Remember what Swami said to that Australian who was late for the talk? What about me? I'm an atheist. And he says, well, can you be the best you can be? I can live with it. And we can live with that. So I did. That was perfect. 12:59. I don't have to answer any questions. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming. If anybody does want to talk, of course, I know how to talk. I'll kiss the Blarney Stone. But I do thank you for coming. So.